So I'm really excited for this panel that we have. We've got really experts in kind of what I consider some of the core elements to the sales tech stack, if not the core elements, which are around, how do we make sure we have clean information coming in? How do we then act upon that information in a way that allows our team to be as effective and efficient as possible? So I'm really excited to introduce my friend Adam from Lead Genius. Adam, what's up, man?
Hey, Jake. It's good to be here.
Awesome. And I haven't had a chance. Adam and I have had many conversations. So Adam and I, we go way back, right? We've done webinars together. The best is whenever we did a webinar together where they didn't record it. And so we didn't, the record button never got clicked. So we had to figure that part out, but it ended up okay. We did a V2 of it, Adam. I thought it turned out pretty good.
I did too.
Yeah.
It's important to have tech that records. So that's one of the things we could talk about.
And then we've got Cassie from Outreach, massive Outreach fans here. We are Outreach's largest implementation partner. Cassie, I don't know if I can go into details. Your partner manager was in town in Austin on Wednesday. We might have been out till 2 a.m. I saw it. We might have closed down. We might have closed down Rainy Street. That could have happened. So I'm a big Outreach fan, right? Obviously. So Cassie, I'm super excited to have you join us here.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. And then Cal was representing our friends at LinkedIn. We also are massive advocates of LinkedIn Sales Nav. We are constantly peddling it to our customers as a must-have tool for growing your presence within accounts, activating new accounts, etc. And so I think, Cal, super excited to have you join us as well today.
Thank you for having me, guys.
All right, so I'm looking at a dream team here. This is great. I'm really excited because these are all tools that we use very actively with our client base. So I feel like I know at least enough about them to go somewhat deeper on, etc. So for everyone who's watching now, what you're going to expect from today is just hopefully a lot of a mix of, like I said, kind of more strategic and also more tactical advice on how to really think about building a scalable, pun intended, scalable tech stack. And I think all of the tools that are represented here today, in my opinion, are the core. You have CRM, which is kind of storing the information, but I feel like between what you three do, it's really the core of this. So we're going to be talking through the 5 pillars of a scalable tech stack, and each person has got kind of their key details that they go into. So I'm going to start with as we jump in here, and again, I'd really encourage everybody to, if you have questions, please make sure to jump in, ask questions. I'm going to try to monitor both LinkedIn and, hold on, I just got a note. I'm going to switch us to gallery view. Okay, there, we're in gallery view. Becca, is that better? I just get text messages that are just like, Jake, you're doing it wrong. So we really enjoy questions. So I really want to encourage everyone. And like I said, whether it's in the chat, we've got Moritz, Global Director of Biz Dev. We've got Joshua, Player Coach AE, help out in RevOps. Love that. My folks on LinkedIn, make sure to start dropping in who you are. Again, I'll be monitoring for questions, so make sure you can drop your questions. So first question, Adam, I'm going to go to you first, which is around the essentials technologies for a sales team. So this is very broad, right? And you can kind of, think about the groundwork tools, whether it's CRM, sales engagement, networking, contact. How do you at Lead Genius and then you, individually think about what goes into the essentials based on today's customer?
True. So one of the reasons why I like Salesforce as a CRM is just due to all the available integrations out there that are out of the box. There's not a lot of custom integrations that you need to build or have a product team or engineer actually build out with a custom webhook. So Salesforce is the primary CRM that I use. I know there are other CRMs out there like Sure CRM and Microsoft Dynamics. But the reason why, again, Salesforce is the go-to CRM for me is just due to the commonality and the ubiquitous nature of the platform. In terms of sales engagement, we got Outreach on the call. I'm a big fan of Outreach as well. For more SMB folks, I actually use Groove right now just due to the nature of being integrated directly out of the box with Gmail and Salesforce directly, and there isn't a separate CRM. Outreach is really powerful, but with power comes responsibility, as they say. And if you don't have a dedicated admin managing outreach that also is aware of what's going on in Salesforce, you can get a lot of mix up. And I've seen that happen with a lot of orgs before. And Cassie, feel free to also correct me if I misunderstood something there, because I know there's been a lot of improvements since then. In sales networking, LinkedIn is probably the LinkedIn Navigator. Also a big fan of that. Pretty much every team that I've worked with has used LinkedIn Navigator. So that's a really like common, probably the best networking tool out there to date. And then for just data enrichment, just shameless plug, we actually are a data company, B2B data company that work with a lot of sales and marketing teams. So we actually eat our own dog food. But I'm not also against any of these other, what people call our competitors like ZoomInfo or Clearbit. In fact, a lot of our customers use all three or even more, just because each data company has just different strengths and weaknesses. And it's important not to just rely on a single source of data for your data needs, such as intent data is something that you might be interested in. Like you might need 6 Sense to facilitate that need, as opposed to custom data is what we specialize in. And then you have ZoomInfo, which is the general firmographic kind of overall web of data out there. So that's kind of how I view, just at a high level,
the essentials.
Like 4 different essential tech.
I love that. Cassie, what about you? Do you want to add anything or kind of add to that? And Cal, you too. Again, I think it's just because I think about it. I feel like with a lot of people, everything kind of feels like core, or almost it's like there's just so many. I think last I counted, I think there's maybe 1,700 sales technologies that exist today. And so I think what is core has evolved, but also is kind of, there's some basics there. So what would you add? If you want to, hop in, feel free, Cassie.
Yeah, I would echo the intent data piece. I feel like intent is something that's so popular right now, but it's critical to how we go to market and how we think about where do we spend and focus our time. So I would say for us right now, like that's something that we're heavily focused on, is like, how do we figure out how to keep our reps focused both in their active deals on any risk, but then as we're trying to prospect out, how do we get in front of the right buyers at the right time? So I would say, in addition to everything that Adam shared, I would just double down on that intent piece right now.
Yeah, I think it's been similar to here. Like, one thing that's interesting is probably we started seeing the increase of conversational intelligence, but I think there's going to probably be another use around it. It's just going to be the reality of like not only just being able to coach your reps, but able to like understand your customer better. So much of the current platform and sales technology is around how do you identify your customers? How do you get in front of those customers? Well, what's the full TAM? And of course, like at LinkedIn, we like live what we sell 100%. But I also think there's going to be like conversational intelligence, which is going to help us actually understand not just our customers in like a data point of view, but like the qualitative, the emotion reactions of a customer, which I think could be like an interesting path around it. So that's probably like the evolution of it as well that we start seeing across as we go into like a more virtual world that we are in right now.
Yeah, and I think about when you think about like the planning, I think it's interesting, and Cassie, even to hear you talk about like that intent data becoming potentially a part of that core. What I see that sometimes the issue around intent data is people aren't tracking the before and after. They're not tracking just like how much better we are before and after. So it's like, it feels right. And like intuitively, it makes sense, right? That if we're getting these certain signals, assuming the quality of signal is strong. But I think that that's interesting. And I agree. I think more and more, it's like, why wouldn't we be using data to say, well, it's not just the demographic data or firmographic data that makes someone a high value. It's also like, is there some level of intent that they might have, right? Versus, I don't know, like randomness of like maybe, but then I think there's a lot of also like older school sales thought, which is like, you never know, right? You never know who's going to be a buyer, et cetera. And I certainly, as a sales leader, I definitely, those words have come out of my mouth before. But I really like that. And I think even some of the things you're talking about, Cal, as well, for, how people are looking at things, maybe even just broader than just identifying customers or identifying the right people or who to target. So what are some tools that, as we go into this, whether it's the connectivity between tools or, because we're talking about kind of pillar one here, which is like planning and setting the foundation. So maybe actually, Cassie, I want to throw this to you. When you think about people buying outreach, and like what to you are like whenever your sales team, they're advising customers, kind of like what are like the must-have like integrations for them, or like, or the must-haves in order to be really ready to use these tools to like their full ability?
Yeah. So some of it's integrations for sure, which is what Adam went to with a CRM that you're connecting to, super important, like a Salesforce or a Dynamics, something to get your contacts. So whether that be a sales nav or a Zoom info or one of those folks, I would say what's most interesting when we advise our customers and think about implementing is the biggest roadblock. Like those pieces of the integration are important, but it's content. And so it's finding folks that either you internally have a relationship with marketing where you're building great sales content and you have that. But what's most interesting when we sit down and we're looking at like, what does the implementation plan look like? Where are we going to run into roadblocks? You've got to have those basic tools in order to make our system up and run, right? It's like just an empty house without that. But the biggest piece of the house is the content. And so I would say, like, in addition to the integrations, it's either internally figuring out your content or going to an external partner who can help you understand and build the types of sales plays that you want your reps running. And then that's where you start iterating your content over and over again.
Yeah, I love that. And obviously, I know a company that does third-party work, FYI. So I think that that's great. What about for you on the Sales Nav side, right? So Sales Nav, what I'm seeing Sales Navigator doing is really starting to get into a lot of different spaces. Like I feel like people maybe even have like this much understanding. It's like, yeah, I build lists and send in-mails, right? It's like, well, there's actually a lot of other things that you can do with it. Like I saw like the new hierarchy feature release that I think a lot of people have no clue even exists. When you think about the Sales Nav and the ecosystems, because you'll plug into Outreach, right? And you plug into tools. Does Sales Nav think about an ecosystem? And obviously there's some things that you can kind of contain within Sales Nav and where that work like an ecosystem, but are there some go-tos for you all from a Sales Nav standpoint for integrations?
Yeah, so there's definitely, the vision that we had set forward with Sales Navigator was around how do we become like a system of engagement? We know organizations use email still as a system of communication. We know CRM is going to be the system of record. How do we plug and play in such a way that we can make those platforms even more powerful? So definitely like having like, an understanding of what your sales stack is, how do we integrate into those is important. I also think like prior to even technical integration, it's just the truth is our best programs have three things in common. They have somebody from sales enablement at the table, there's somebody from sales leadership at the table, and there's somebody from sales operations at the table. So when Cassie's talking about, hey, all programs can't go without content, it's actually trying to understand who are the internal people that we need to bring to the table and to launch an important program. So there's definitely like technical integration, but I also think there's like people integration that, we often underlook when we think about like sales tech.
Oh, I love that, right? Because I mean, I'm sure none of your sales teams would ever say, it's so easy to get started. Like we have an onboarding program and like, it's magically going to work. And the people are like, yes, absolutely. And then I think that's actually kind of a really good segue into kind of our next, which is this idea. And I love what you said too. So for anyone out there, when you're thinking about the pillars here, about like what goes into just the foundations of great kind of, whether it's the usage of the tech, selecting the right tech for you, if there's not a buy-in and understanding around what it's actually going to take to get the technology implemented and kind of a realisticness of that, coupled with, Cassie was saying, and Adam is mentioning too, if you have kind of that dedicated person or you work with a partner like us who can be that expert because we worked in all these tools so frequently, that's probably the big one that we see is just like, if you're a sales ops or rev ops leader, you've maybe implemented these tools once, twice, maybe. And so it's really, like you said, it's getting those different groups involved. So maybe this SDR leader has been involved once or twice, ops leader, senior leadership's like, no, this is the direction that we're going, versus I think sometimes we just look at tech as just a tool versus like it's a change that when done correctly, it's going to be a positive change impact on your company. And I think sometimes people really struggle with that, or at least to make those changes. So we've got a couple of questions here that I'll hop on before we go into pillar 2, which is about this implementation and how to make sure it goes right. So first is from Joseph Tripp. What's going on, Joseph? Thank you for your question here. He says, if you're using the standard SaaS sales structure, are SDRs using the same CRM as your AE, or SDRs using Outreach and AEs using Salesforce, or both using the same? So Cassie, I will turn that to you first, and then you feel free, Adam or Cal, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I think for a long time, especially when we first started, we mostly saw the users on our product were BDRs, SDRs, and then AEs would be in Salesforce or in CRM. What we saw, I would say, over the last year and a half, and it was accelerated in the pandemic, was more and more. We now have about 50% of our users are in some sort of closing role, and 50% of our users are in some sort of meeting generating type role. And I think it really came down to a couple things. Like, first was AEs are now responsible for a lot more of their own prospecting. And so introducing playbooks to help the AEs not necessarily do the same prospecting as their SDR counterparts, but collaborate with their SDRs, and then they own strategic prospecting. So for example, at Outreach, our SDRs are amazing and they have insane KPIs and they do great work. And then our AEs have different KPIs, but they still use sequences in order to drive their own outbound meetings. And we have KPIs around what they do for prospecting. I also think our product has caught up with some of the things that AEs need. So for example, just at Unleash I guess it's been a couple months ago now, but we unveiled what we call success plans, which are mutual action plans. So working with your prospect to what are the steps that you need to drive to close a deal or to get them implemented. So I would say now it's equally likely that we'll see an AE on the product as we'd see a BDR, and there's definitely benefits to having them collaborate, and then benefits to each group individually.
So your vote is they should all data then should go into Salesforce. Like, you should have them on both.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right.
And it's from the AE perspective, it is if you have them using Outreach, and even if they're sending an email at 10 p.m. at night in AE, it's going to log back to CRM. So getting your AEs on Outreach will make your Salesforce data better. I
agree. Adam?
Yeah, that's the other thing I was going to add is just it's really important to keep the systems integrated. Regardless if they're working out of Salesforce or they're working out of Outreach, it should theoretically be the same source of truth for what's being logged. I know a lot of people actually prefer to work at Outreach. It's just a better user experience. So if they're doing that, just make sure that everything is synced directly to Salesforce, all the activity, all the information that they're filling out on records. So there isn't a disconnect there. And that's one of the things that, if it's not set up properly, you can have a lot of tech debt moving forward, or just have a lot of holes in your data, which is ultimately going to set you back a couple of steps.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Meaning, I posted, I think it was yesterday, some random LinkedIn post like recently, where it's like I really feel like people are maybe doing 20 to 30% of the integrations that they could be with data. And I think just some of it is just a knowledge gap, meaning the tools are all evolving. All three of your tool sets are just evolving so quickly that as an operations leader, it's really tough to know, like, oh, wait, that you can create an automation rule now for that, or oh, wait, you can suck that piece of data in from Sales Nav, or we can augment in real time based on a new sequence being developed with Lead Genius. Like, I just think that a lot of this is just people kind of have, for sales tech, I feel like there's kind of a little bit of a set it and forget it mindset. It's like, and that kind of goes into this next piece here, which is about ongoing adoption and training. So, Cal, when you think about this, you think about implementation, and you started to touch on it. And so I'll kind of recap having the right team that's going to be a part of this. Are there other pitfalls that you see when we think about initial adoption and ongoing training? What are some other pitfalls that you potentially see around, whether it's the implementation process or reinforcement process?
Yeah. So one is, you mentioned this thing where people don't realize sales tech is change, right? And they just think of it as like tech. We buy tech, we buy like an Apple Watch and you're like ready to go. But what I think people forget is that sales tech enables change in behavior. So often, and if you aren't committed to change in behavior, you could have the best sales tech and it's going to be lukewarm. So it's not like, the truth is it's actually worth challenging ourselves. If you're thinking about, hey, I want my reps to be building and expediting relationship building in the existing business. And if they're actually not doing that, you're going to use the platform. But if they're just actually not even bought into the behavior change that you're asking them to use the tech, is actually where we are like really hit roadblocks. So like doing the homework and making sure that people actually bought into what's the behavior change you're asking for and why is that important? What happens if you don't do it in 12 months? What happens if you don't do it in 18 months? And then the sales tech enables that. But sales tech does not convert people who are not used to prospecting for new customers to all of a sudden be like, you know what, I like doing prospecting. So I think that notion around first get the buy-in of what's the behavior you want to change, and then talk about how the sales tech enables that.
I love that. What is the issue we're having?
Yeah.
And then again, and then I think what you're saying too is, are you committed to solving it, or are you trying to slap a Band-Aid on it? Because you can't just throw sales tech at a process problem and a implementation cycle like this and a reinforcement cycle like this and expect to see results that you could see. And I think that is probably the biggest issue that we see when we come in on the back of a failed tech launch, right? Or hey, like, we know we should be getting more out of this. It's that the buy-in was lukewarm up top. People just didn't want to do it, kind of go through a big, change or overhaul. Cassie, this is for you. There's a client we were talking to maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago that was doing a lot of things manually, medium-sized sales team. And so we're talking about change, and we're talking about bringing in a tool like Outreach. And the guy's like, this is just too much. By the way, they're at 50% of their outbound target, 50. You know what? We're actually just going to bring in a trainer. I'm like, bro, what? Like, what world do you think that the solution to you're at 50% of target is a 2-day sales training? Like, I just feel like sales, I think that there's something there where we just have this mindset of like, we don't have time. So let's just keep throwing Band-Aids at like a broken femur. You know what I mean? And like, it perpetuates. And so I'll kind of ask, maybe Cassie, for you, what are some other things that when you think about maybe, successful initial adoption and then reinforcement? Because I really feel like it's that reinforcement that is really missing, that, companies will have an onboarding process, but there's no, reinforcement. And maybe even just if it's things that you all do at Outreach, or how you kind of get people kickstarted to really move forward quickly.
Yeah. So I would agree with Cal of like, you have to, it's really 2 parts. It's, do you have the executive sponsorship, and is that person there when it launches? But is that person, and whoever that might be, like, I think about our EVP of sales, Mark, who is Outreach's first salesperson. Every class that we have that comes in of new account executives, he meets with them and he explains to them the value of our top 5 tools and why we use them and how it ties back to the KPIs. And so I think getting that executive sponsorship at the beginning when you're launching it, where we see it fail in the reinforcement is that executive sponsor is there then, and then ongoing isn't. And so getting that person who's really committed to seeing the end result or the outcomes continue to be involved as you bring in new hire classes or quarterly in the sales meetings, whatever it needs to be to get in front of those reps to say, these are our KPIs, this is why they matter, and this is how they tie back to hitting our business number, or whatever the bigger initiative is. You've got to tie all that back. I also think it goes back to Adam's point of, do you have tool ownership? And so what we'll see a lot of times is the exact Band-Aid, right? It's like you buy a Tesla, then you take it home and you realize you don't have the plug and then you don't have a house that can get the plug, whatever it is, right? And so I think for the ongoing piece, like I think about our friends in RevOps at all these orgs that we work with, they're critically important. And we need to make sure that they understand everything that can be done. But also, like I always encourage our folks, it's like someone needs to own this. Like you can't have this unattended baby here. Otherwise, the baby could die. And we've got to like take care of our pretty baby. And so, yeah, I think both the executive sponsorship, but then also having ownership on the customer side is super important.
Yeah. Can I ask a question there?
Yeah.
So do you walk away from the deal, right? So like, just to kind of like put it out there, right? That I think we all know that this is the case, right? And we all know that sales teams also love to sell easy, simple, whatever it is. How do you, maybe, and if any of you have organizations that are already trying to balance this, I'd love to hear some specifics, but I've been a big fan of this concept. And probably, I don't know, maybe we see it in 10 to 15% of companies where part of a sales rep's compensation is tied to a usage metric. So it's like, I'm going to get X dollars, 80% of my commission for signed contract, and then 20% for once they achieve a certain usage threshold. And I feel like it's right now, things are so siloed between the departments that it kind of creates this, we know that these are the right things, but if sales has no compensation tied to what happens after they throw it over the fence, are they going to do it? You know, and so do any of you have, whether it's through compensation or any other just types of metrics, or maybe it's culturally, kind of ways that your organization gets more of that to happen, more executive sponsorship, less friction between sales and AEs? And feel free, this is for really kind of anyone, if you all have anything that you're doing.
Yeah, we've done through comp. So exactly how you're talking about it, Jake, to like, you know, you're not only comped on the actual deal, but you're comped on, you know, the expansion of the customer after they've become a customer. So if they grow by X amount, they're going to get a percentage of that. So they're incentivized that way, with carrots, not sticks, as much to, you know, to not only sign customers, to sign the good customers that are going to grow. It also gives them more opportunities to basically work opportunities that are going to more likely to close. It's a lot easier to close a deal that's already warmed up than just a cold, you know, prospect that we don't talk to before and haven't proven value with.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. So, you know, I think it's a combination of what we're trying to do, which is both cultural and like process oriented. So, you know, process oriented is like, we're pretty transparent, like any new logo that gets closed, that gets handed off to a relationship management team, the notes are actually public. Like you can see it when the close one goes out, what the notes are, how much work has been done, what's the understanding of it. So that just like creates, you know, a good transition, but also there's a little bit of visibility factor to it. As for the cultural, like we've been so focused about this notion around customer value and how we think about it. And internally, you know, whenever we look at our accounts and we look at our renewals like 50 days away, like 90 days away, we definitely look internally as how do we actually, how you know, here's a measurement of customer value. It's changing, it's going to get better. But like, how is our existing portfolio doing against those metrics? So I think there's a combination. We're trying to experiment. How do you make it process? But culturally, there's definitely an emphasis around doing the right thing by the customer and trying to find the right customer, signing up the right customer on our platform.
Yeah, we measure what we call weekly active usage, where that somebody has to log into Outreach and take a sales positive motion. So not just log in, but actually take a sales activity. So our reps are tasked with getting at least 80% weekly active usage in any of their accounts. And so we're focused on that. And we also, I think the other piece is especially in our larger market, we're focused on how do we have tough conversations with our customers or our prospects around like, hey, for an existing customer, why do you need to pay for additional professional services, or for a new business logo? And it was funny, I was on with a prospect last week and they were like, gosh, like, you know, competitors out there saying this is really easy. And I'm like, gosh, it's just not. And this is why, this is why, and this is the value of actually paying for this, and this is the value of the services. And you know, I think the more that we can spread the word of having tough conversations actually accelerates your deal and it builds trust. I think especially among younger reps who are nervous to have those tougher conversations, but in the end, it leads to a significantly better relationship. So I think there's an element of sales training in it too.
I agree. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think culturally you can handle some of this. And the more that you align, you know, the more you break down the silos, you know, you're having, you know, a monthly or quarterly conversation where CS is talking to sales about, hey, this is what's coming down. Like, this is your peer. This is what's happening. And frontline leadership is saying, hey, we don't overpromise. That's not what we do here. You know, like you're going to have to I'm going to make you go get on the phone with this buyer in 6 weeks if these 4 things come up. And I can remember, I mean, I think that part of that is cultural, you know, and that, you know, making sure that you break down those barriers between, I think, again, you know, and Adam sounds like his, you know, the reps at Lead Genius are also responsible for growth, which is why these are newer problems, right? Like it used to be like whenever you like prospected your own accounts, sold them, and then worked with the people, you had no incentive to sell bad deals because you knew you had to like work with them. But, you know, as we've thrown up these walls of a very siloed SDR team, a somewhat siloed CS team, then these friction points, you know, have to be addressed. So I think that this is like really great, very tactical ways that people can do it. So for time's sake, I want to go to pillar 3, which is don't rest on your tech stack. So Adam, I'll toss this one to you. How can teams make sure that they evolve with it? You know, whether it's even your own internal teams and how you all think about tech, or, you know, how you're advising customers on, you know, tech that integrates. How do you make sure that you're evolving with tech?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like it's really important to stay up to date with all the updates that are coming out. I know that product newsletters get sent out, on a pretty regular basis with all the text that you're using. It's good not to ignore them, to actually I actually try to read through everything and identify, does any of this apply to my business? And what are some things that, what are the gaps in our tech stack that maybe this tech that we already have can facilitate, so we don't have to onboard an entirely new tech to accomplish the exact same need. So I feel like that's one of the most important things you can do. Also identify all the pains of your business and figure out where the holes lie. And to actually go to these webinars, to actually go to these forums where they talk about a lot of tech, to see what's out there.
Yep.
That's one of the things I try to not get complacent with. It's I have all my needs covered right now, thankfully, but it's not going to stay that way, a month from now, possibly, or even a year from now. So I got to actually get in front of it and see what are the upcoming challenges that teams are facing, and when it was the tech that is out there that can help solve for that.
Love that. Cal, Cassie, how's your team staying on top of it?
One is just thinking about user feedback. It's your best reps will be in the know in the market. I always hear about sales technology from some of my reps who are just students of this craft and students of the space, and probably feel the pain more than the rest of us do. So they're just they'll talk about it. And of course, after that, we as leaders have to do the work to be is this a strategic priority, or is this a short-term pain a rep is facing? And I think you end up becoming a quote unquote tech hoarder when it's just a little bit, this decision-making is decentralized. It's not really targeted to a strategic priority. But there is a balance between learning from being a student of your own sellers, and then balancing what you believe the business needs to do in the next 12 months, 18 months, and the next 24 months, and see if what they've brought forward to you is actually a strategic priority. So I think there is component around that. The other thing to think about is, there's probably 3 integrations that are important. So one is strategic integration, which is, what is the rallying cry that your reps are going to hear in their sales kickoff? And how does this platform help you with that? Is it hey, we're going to go after the top 500 accounts, we're going to go get that? How does this platform that you're going to invest in help that? So that's just clarity around it. And the second is business process integration. So some of us mentioned, Cassie mentioned that when they have a new hire batch, they'll hear the VP of sales talk about the importance of the 5 platforms they have. But the business process integration is how do you have, whether do you have onboarding, whether do you have forecasting, do you have weekly metrics, and how does that platform connect to that? And third is tech integration. What is your existing technology and how does it integrate into that? So as you're thinking about scaling and how you keep up with times, I do think this just being do we have strategic integration? Do we have business process integration? And do we have technical integration? Usually helps us adapt and evolve as well.
Yeah, I would say for us, I agree with you, Cal. Our sales folks are out there. They know what they need. They know, they feel the pain every day. So we actually do quarterly, our product team does these sprints, and actually it's our AEs that bring the product ideas. And sometimes they bring an idea where it's gosh, we need to go buy this. This isn't in our world, but they will bring ideas to our product team to say hey, here's a little thing in our product, or here's something. And that's actually where our mutual action plan software came from, was an AE who was saying, hey, I'm doing this ugly Google sheet. I'm sharing it with my prospects and it's accelerating my deals. And so we quarterly sit down and think about and let our AEs pitch to our product team things for our own product, or things that they otherwise are gosh, we know this is out there and this is something that would help us close more business. So I think letting those folks who do the hard work every day tell you what they need is really helpful.
I love that. Yeah. And I think a lot of what you're hearing here is from the front line. And again, I really like that idea of those are the where you should keep your ear to the ground to understand, as opposed to making these decisions up here because a VP got connected with Ryan at Gong and is now we got to buy Gong, which sometimes, and people might be laughing because I promise you that is how a lot of technology is purchased right now, is a VP says oh, there's a shiny new thing, go buy that. And then they don't validate it with the front lines. They don't think about how to put together a beta group. There's just a lot of issues when you're doing a lot of top-down tech buying. But two caveats there, I'd say. One, as a leader, myself included, I probably take meetings with at least 2, if not 3 new sales tech providers every week. Why? Because I know that right now the ecosystem is evolving so much. If there's something that you're doing manual, there's a very high likelihood that whatever that thing is, there's a technology right now that solves like a big part of it. And I feel like if you want to be a modern leader, you can't just outsource your knowledge to rev ops or sales ops. If you want to be a modern VP, you have to understand the art of possible, or you're going to continue to build these old school organizations where you're not using certain automations behind the scenes. And I think a lot of VPs are just like, well, yeah, I got my sales ops team. It's like, well, you're the person who needs to have a vision for this. You need to understand the art of possible. And so I agree with kind of what Adam is getting at too, that you've got to take a meeting here, take a meeting there, just see what's out there. Then don't disrupt your organization. Like Cal, like Cassie, map the business plan. Where does this fit in? Is this applicable? Maybe it's applicable in 9 to 18 months. Cool. We now like know that this thing exists. And so I think for a lot of sales leaders, you make the decisions based on what's happening on the front lines, but I don't think you can afford as a VP of sales, even as you all talked about them being involved and getting out of the weeds. I feel like that's a very old school mindset, which is like, well, I have people for that. Like you do, but you need to also understand the strategic impact of this and that there is a change management lift, right? And I think maybe like one of my like larger hypotheses is like Salesforce ruined it for everybody. Like, because people can't stand certain things about Salesforce, it's like that was like the first sales tech. And so there's like this like, there's like this like, oh, that gets bad. Like it's cumbersome, it's bad, it's whatever. And I feel like we're still kind of fighting that to some extent. So, all right, I've got a couple more questions here. And again, people feel free, I'm trying to monitor LinkedIn too. So let's talk about kind of next pillar here, which is around your company is paying for software without using it effectively. We call it a tech hoarder, right? You've bought all this stuff. It's sitting there. Adam, what do you think about kind of turning it around? So we bought all this stuff, we have it. This kind of goes into that reinforcement question. How do you make sure, we talk about one point of contact, how do you kind of get things pivoted or turned around to see like, hey, what's like really critical?
Yeah, I think it's really important to identify the tech redundancies that you have. The most common thing that I see is exactly what you're saying about like a VP has used the software in the past, go buy that thing. Where's the next new shiny object? But to actually look at your tech stack from like 1,000-foot view and see like what problems each of these solving and where is the overlap. In some cases, some overlap might be okay because this other software does something completely unique. But in a lot of cases, I've seen people use like Yesware, Outreach, Cirrus Insight, Groove, and SalesLoft all in one, or just because you have different sales managers and they all want to use their own sales enablement platform that they've used in the past. So that's probably the most important thing. And then back to just education, understand exactly what your tech stack does and each layer and how it benefits the team. And sometimes you might see things where it's actually causing more of a business pain, not just with the overall spend, but just having things tracked, your activities tracked in 8 different ways. It's not a scalable way of running a business at all.
Yeah, I love that. What about anybody else around? Again, like thinking about it, we've even got a question in here. Again, I was just kind of pulling some of these questions that are around this idea, which is again kind of that people have purchased it, but there's not long-term upkeep. What else do you all think about whenever you think about kind of getting back to basics or getting the most out of your tech? Love that idea of looking for redundancies. I think Adam, it goes back to it. It's like, I don't even think most people realize there are redundancies. They're like, I bought this tool for this one thing. Just think about Outreach to me is a perfect, and SalesNav, right? Well, actually all 3 of your platforms. It's like people still, for the most part, like, oh yeah, it's a sequencing tool. Oh, SalesNav, yeah, that's where I send in-mails. It's like, no. There's a lot more that you can do with these tools, but if you don't take the time to really think strategically, it becomes difficult. So any other piece of advice around again, things that you can do midstream or even maybe this is either one of you, Cal or Cassie, how are you really keeping people up to speed or keeping them because again, the newsletter is like, yeah, great. Oh yeah, I'm going to pour through that over like a glass of wine later or something. Like, let's be realistic. Like it's probably not happening. Right. But like, what are some things that you all do to make sure that your customers kind of continue to see value and that you're staying on top of some of these new developments?
Yeah, I think a lot about revenue attribution. And so thinking about like each tool in your tech stack and how do you measure its contribution to whatever it's supposed to do for you. So like how we measure the number of meetings from Sales Nav, we measure the number of meetings from our sequences, like we attribute everything back to revenue. And with our customers, we sit down and we have what we call our customer engagement framework, which is basically their sales funnel. And then every quarter we pick a part of the funnel, whether that's the top, which is just activity or meeting set or interactions or opportunities, whatever piece of that funnel is, that's how we present back our value to our customers is how are we impacting that funnel and how is at the end of it, the revenue attribution. So I would say like really dig in with any partners that you have and figure out how can you tie it back to revenue. And then once you figure out the partners that you really need, which partner is worth investing if you're 2 years into a contract with them and you feel like you could get more out of it, where is it worth investing resources into a professional services engagement or a partner relationship to drive more value? So I think about it in terms of where are you driving revenue from?
Love that.
Well, I think like sounds simple, but it's hard to implement. And Kathy talked about this. It's just account management best practices around having quarterly business reviews. And you talked about like, do you walk away from a customer? But I think it's less around that, but it's like when you sign up a customer, that they also commit to a quarterly business review. And that's, our customers are busy. So how do you make sure that it's meaningful, that they want to come back every 3 months with us, so that we're measuring value and we're continuing to evolve the definition of the value as their business processes evolve as well.
I love that. And I think the issue with that, and this is a totally unrelated topic to tech, but it's just having a proactive growth mindset versus reactive triage mindset and making sure that you've got your accounts in the proper tiers or however you manage that. And that's what we see is that teams are so used to just being reactive because they have poor processes and SLAs for how they engage, like you said. And the quality of those business reviews is such mediocre. Oh, hey, Cassie, I'm checking in, touching base, catching up. So after 6 months, the customer's like, yuck. I do not want to touch base again with Adam. I mean, I like touching base, with Adam, but like, I think it's a combination, right? Of like the consistency and the quality of that consistent touch point. So we got another question here, and then we've got kind of one last pillar to wrap up on. But I thought this is a good one. And I don't know, this may be, I think actually any of you could probably talk to this. Andrew Keppel asks, what are best practices for balancing reps' freedom to experiment? Could be used tools, could be within it, but also having appropriate guardrails. So, how do you think about this? Because this is interesting. Cal, you were talking about how, you bring ideas to managers. I've gotten, yelled at from sales leaders before for saying this. I'm like, if I was a rep, I would have no problem spending $6 to $7+ $100 a month on my own, building my own sales tech. Like sometimes I feel like, I'm like, why do you feel like an organization should have, if you think there's value and it's going to help you to hit quota, go buy it yourself. Go put in your credit card for Sales Nav. I guarantee you, if I call up Outreach and I work at Oracle and I'm like, hey, I'm a rep at Oracle and I want to buy 1 seat. Right. And guess what? If it works well, I'm going to bring you in. Hey, Adam, I'm a whatever at Lead. I'm going to pay for Lead Genius. You're like, yeah, sure. Fine. 1 seat. I'm going to make you successful so I can break in. I just feel like also reps need to have a little bit more ownership. It goes back to what I said, leadership. Leaders need to stay on top of what's out there. And like you said, Cal, your team's already doing demos of other. I just feel like you're just going to be left behind if you're a rep who's just used to doing all this stuff manually, and as opposed to finding your data with Lead Genius or appending the data with Lead Genius. Like you're just really in trouble there. But I also feel like I don't know if we're doing a great job right now of the experimentation part or of like encouraging reps. So how do you all do that? How do you all think about this kind of bringing in tech and experimenting versus it being somewhat top down?
I look at it from in terms of guide rails, a security perspective. Like I'm typically fine with anyone experimenting with things as long as it doesn't like put our data security at risk. Like shady extensions can just download all the data from your CRM and send it into the web, and thankfully there aren't that many out there. So I tend to just talk with reps and say like, hey, if you want to use something, just talk about it. Let's figure out what need is it solving for, and it might do something better. And if it does something better than what we already have, like let's talk about changing it. So in terms of guide rails, it really just comes down to security. And then also, is it sucking away time, or is it making it more difficult? Is it messing up our macro analytics for tracking? Like, by you using this tech, do I have to basically track everything completely different just to cater to your needs? How much time is that going to take me? How much time is it going to take you on the rest of the team? So those are the two things I think about at a high level.
Love it.
Yeah, we saw an evolution. So, I've been at LinkedIn for 8 years. So I would say, like, before we were like big on like everybody innovate your own playbook and go for it. And I now see that like us getting into a more central, like, how do we have a unified playbook? Because when everybody runs from the same playbook, we run faster. And I actually see that with our customers too. Like you mentioned, some sales manager had Sales Navigator before, loved it, believed in the product. They go to a new team, they buy it for the 7 reps. But what happens in that scenario is that it's harder, if you are a VP of sales and you're doing like a global sales leadership meeting, it's hard to ever talk about one thing because all your leaders, your frontline managers are all doing different things. They're all on different platforms. So it's hard to drive change in behavior, and change in behavior does need executive sponsorship. So I think the way we see it is document the process of experimentation. Like, if you are going to have, like, you want your reps to, they're excited about a product, like, what's the best way for them to make sure that their voices are heard with sales management and sales leadership? What's the best way for them to know, like, how do you get in front of your sales operations and sales enablement who are buying tech for your customers? What's the best way to present business cases to them? I think the transparency of the process is important, but like true change needs top-down mandate, and that's hard to do if it's not universally applicable to everybody in some capacity or the other.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think you can do it. But like you said, I think that there are a lot of tools that may require it, and it may not be scalable. But I do think we need to bake in an experience, especially around content, Cassie. And we don't have to go deep on content right now, but best practices around what to write. It's like, hey, we have this systematized process, but reps should be spending, once they've figured out how to execute that best-in-class process, how to spend 5, 10, 15% of their time optimizing.
Yeah.
And making those changes.
We do a lot of experimentation in what we call pods. So thinking about, not just one rep, but for example, we do what we call an AE play of the week. And it's 3 reps at a time that build a new play. And then the whole team tries that for the week. And then the next, we try different things, but in a way where we can see if it's going to work, to your point, Cal, across a broader team, but it still allows for the experimentation. And when we do the quarterly product reviews, oftentimes something will spin out of that where, again, another pod, so a group of cross-functional folks, so maybe somebody in our SMB team, somebody in our large market team, they'll go out and they'll test a product for us and do so for, 3-6 months, and then come back and say, okay, across this pod, was it successful, and is it something we should invest in? So yeah, we try to give people creativity as much as we can, while also figuring out, can this scale and work for us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's it. It's like, and that pod mentality is the right mentality, and then making sure that you have a mechanism to move things. What I see as the issue is when these things all just become like, it almost feels like a campaign where it's like, this is something that we're doing now. This is something that we're trying, as opposed to the goal is to then institutionalize it. And I think that's it, is a lot of customers and companies don't have an innovation institution. Oh man, this is a lot of words here. But like the ability to institutionalize innovation as it happens in real time, especially in the sales org. So the last piece, or actually, you know what? We'll say this, the last pillar here is around sales and marketing and everything integrated. I think we've talked a lot about this, right? About the idea of scoping what's happening, et cetera. But I think we've got a better question that I think it'll be to end on it. So pillar 5 is make sure sales and marketing and everything is integrated, right? That this concept of, again, it goes back to everything that everyone's talked about, mapping out the processes, where are we losing things out of the end of the funnel, where can we better integrate, et cetera. So this last question is from anonymous attendee, which I love that too. How do you justify sales tech spend at different stages of companies? We're a well-funded seed stage HR tech. However, our own leadership makes it much easier to spend on hiring than sales tech.
I mean, one way to think about this is just the cost of productivity. How long does it take your average rep to get productive? And what would the revenue impact be if they got more productive 1 month before, 2 months before, 3 months before? So that's one. And then second is retention. You're hiring great people who are like selling in this landscape are accustomed to being set up for success in some capacity. So like thinking about the long-term retention aspect of this is important too.
Yeah, I think the question to ask yourself too is, making an investment in hiring somebody without technology is really scary. So going and looking at it and saying like, buying something like an outreach, right? Where you can turn one person into 2 or 3 people and double the amount of meetings or triple the amount of meetings that you're getting for that one rep. It's a far more cost-effective way than trying to scale it out and just hire another person or a third person. So sometimes technology can actually help you accelerate without the overhead cost of a hire plus all their benefits and everything else. So I think just sometimes actually putting in perspective the cost of the technology versus what's the cost of a fully loaded employee.
Yeah,
I think that's great. Adam, what would you add, man?
Well, just like I think this has already been mentioned, but just the opportunity cost of basically manually putting in data, if that's one of the use cases of buying a new technology. Not only the opportunity cost of just wasting time doing that, but also like I've seen that if people have to do it manually, just not going to do it. So, further down the line, when you have to go back and see and examine your KPIs, like, do you even have a way to do that? And if you don't, that's a huge amount of money, lost. And again, like if they're manually doing it, and there's already a tool out there to help them do it automatically. That's time that they could be using like prospecting as opposed to just doing data entry, which is not why you hired them. You didn't hire them to data entry, you hired them to actually sell. So
yeah, and if you do that, and then again, you take kind of that pod approach as well too. And what I've found to be successful with leaders, you say, look, I understand. Let's do this. Let's pick 2 people. We'll do X, Y, Z. If we're able to see this lift, then we'll do this. I think too often when reps go and ask, they're like, we need this tool. Okay, great. Tell me more. Like you don't put together, sometimes as a rep, you've got to put together the business case, right? The other thing to think about, and this is like, I think the biggest trend that we're going to see in the 2020s of sales evolution is that I'll do the PG version of this, which is sales leaders' legacy or how people view sales leaders is the size of their sales team. That if Johnny Smith scales a company to 250 million in revenue and does it with 400 people versus Susan did it to 250 with 80 people, people go, oh man, look at him. He's managed 400 people. Wow, he must be really bright and smart. Meanwhile, Susan did it with 75 people because she knows how to leverage technology. Mentally, psychologically, still in sales, we look at people who have managed or grown teams larger as being more competent. That is going to change because of all the things that we're talking about now. That it still is that way today. We see it all the time. Like, well, but have they managed this? It's like they've scaled revenue to this number multiple times. They've been able to do it more effectively. And so I think that's why sometimes as reps, you need to go make the business case because a sales leader, and it could be unconscious, wants more people, looks good on the resume. And so sometimes some of these efficiency gains, although they're so logical, I feel like take too long because we're so used to hiring that, because I can tell you what forecasts are based off of. They're based off of humans and guest attrition, not like, can we get 20% more out? And so I think we're seeing those there's like winds of change come about, but that's why I think as a rep, you've got to maybe sell more than you might think. So a little more philosophy to end this on, but it just is what it is. So big thank you to all of you. Thank you so much. We had probably, I don't know, almost 50 plus 60 people between LinkedIn and Zoom. So I really appreciate everyone tuning in. Thank you, all of you. You made this conversation so tactical and practical, and also a lot of strategy in there as well too. So Adam, Cal, Cassie, I really appreciate you. And we will see everyone next week where we're going to talk about the future of RevOps, which we talked a lot about today too, which is good. So thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next week.